И настолько, что они не против. То есть деревья не против выращивать. Так чтобы, ну, не против, чтобы ты кушал их плоды. Понимаешь? Они для этого такие сочные, красивые, вкусные, мягкие, аппетитные там и так далее. Да? И для этого дерево, грубо говоря, понимает, что ну сейчас ты сожрешь как бы много всего. Ну он понял, да, что да. Ну он это имел в виду. Но это не. Нет, я просто объясняю, что это нормально, это не жестоко. А вот есть сами растения, например, овощи, или их листья, это вандализм. Это жестоко и тоже, ну как бы тоже по идее, да. Ну он тебя понял уже. Ну не ешь тогда вообще ничего. Тогда желудочно-кишечный тракт вообще удали себе полностью. Вот от ануса, и за шеи анус, кстати, тоже. До рта, да, полностью все вырежи, все, да, вот и все, и питайся солнцем, шмонц, хоть чем, да, воздухом, праной, хрена, да, души космические принимай, что угодно, да, понимаешь. Но явно, что человек должен, ну, понимает, ну, она про себя так говорит, она про себя так думает, просто наоборот, да. Нет, я тебе еще раз объясняю, да. Мне насрать, что вы имбецилы, я тебе еще раз объясняю, что вот это еда для человека, и это вот и человеку надо что-то есть, и вот это еда. Все остальное отрава. Едой не является в большей или меньшей степени. Но поскольку у человека неадекватные реакции, ну то есть, да, то есть химически далек, ну неважно, да, он тебе про себя говорит. Я тебе еще раз объясняю, что они хотят сказать, что медицина хочет знать, что... Да, она поняла тебя просто, да. Можешь голову не ломать, просто, да. Я тебе говорю, что они все будут неправы. И, да, что практически на 100%, что вот еда это фрукты. Все остальное это дрянь. Просто, да, поняла, ну, надо про себя так же думать. Но это я не к тому, что говорю, чтобы там что-то делать или что-то не делать, там, нет, это начихать. Я тебе говорю, как, да. Ну, что вот так вот. Такая реальность, да. Вот я про это говорю, но ты не проживешь на фруктах ноги. Ну, наверное, если тебе женщина, ты же женщина, тебе же не надо много, тебе мозги-то не нужны, правильно? Вот женщинам-то может и так. Ну я так чисто гипотетически. Или одно другого стоит, может и наоборот. Но если тебе работать не надо, ну все равно тебе надо быть, да, какой-то. Может и так. Нет, это не вопрос того, что какое-то питание или не питание. Потому что да. Вот военным и динозаврам надо много жрать, понимаешь, потому что у них мускулатура работает, вместо мужских органов, все выражения. Да. Ну уж извините. Да. Меня это не касается. Это не суть разговора, я вообще не об этом говорю. Я просто говорю, что да. Что это не поддерживается эволюционно. То есть если ты не поддерживается здоровьем человека, если человек, короче, не поддерживается ничем. Делами, ничем. Понимаешь? Надо иметь в виду. Но это не КПД, это значит, что ты сильно не КПД, и твой прицел очень сильно сбит. Если он у тебя сбит на овощи, имей в виду, что он сбит, потому что овощи это тоже не еда. Ты можешь ими питаться, но ты знаешь, что это не еда. Делай выводы. Вот, да, понимаю. Да. Ну даже так, да. Меня это не волнует.
Okay, so what do we do in this case? Like, is it going to poison us? Well, there's some interesting research, okay? To some degree, lectins do affect us. There's a study that was published in the journal Phytochemistry that found that when insects eat lectins, they end up having a disruption.
Жить захочешь, ты такой делаешь дела, у тебя что-нибудь там опухло, отказало что-нибудь. Жить захочешь, да, то есть на любой диете просидишь. Ну, уже я просто так говорю. Да. Но это уж что теперь поделаешь. Значит, не касается. Если жить захочешь, то было бы зачем, хочешь сказать? А вдруг выяснится, что есть зачем. Да просто даже умирать больно, да. Ну это
Of the endothelium of what's called their midgut, which is basically like our small intestine. So they're clearly having an effect, but usually pound for pound, or milligram for milligram, or however you weigh an insect, they're eating a lot more tomato than we would be, right? They're eating like the equivalent of like half a Volkswagen of tomato if we were to compare it to our size. Of course that's going to cause an issue, okay? Now, when you get down to the weight loss plateau side, lectins can impede
А вы
weight
как
loss.
считаете?
How do they do that?
То есть,
So there was a study that was
что,
published in
что овощи это нормальная еда для человека? Что человек должен есть овощи, что ли? Серьезно? Ты не шутишь? Да. Он о себе так думает. Ну, следовательно говоря, ну хорошо, ну изъяснись тогда. Почему ты не можешь кушать то, что является, да, понимаешь? Вот видишь, очень просто. Достаточно, вот и все. Да. Томат. Ну томат. Ну, наверное, плоды. Ну это, да, плод. Это тоже же овощ, блин, тоже, да? Ну тоже фрукт, по сути, это, или что это, ягода? Ягода же томат, да? Ну не само, ну да. Картошка это тоже, это как бы тоже растение, это ну то есть ты тоже убиваешь растение. А картошка не запланирована, чтобы ты ее кушал, да, понимаешь? Ну да. Ну какие-то грызуны там, она же невкусная даже. Да, то есть, да. У тебя же нет хряка там этих, так сказать, каких-то этих когтей, чтобы копаться в земле, там, что, понимаешь? Ну, то есть, и она не аппетитная, ты ее выкапываешь просто как, да, она понимает. Да. Это вот мандаринка, апельсинка, что-нибудь. Яблочко, там, не знаю, груша свежайшая, да, понимаю. Да, понял. Аромат. Да, наоборот. Но себе так думает он. Да. Любви, аромат любви. Наверное, не знаю. Наверное, так. То, что я беременная, да, да, я понимаю. Ну да. Ну, что теперь сделать? Ну тогда убей саму, растение само убей, маму саму убей. Да. Ну да, понимает он тебя, да. Ну, типа того, да. Ну, что поделаешь, мир такой, что теперь? Надо же чем, и тогда что? То есть ты будешь летать как и питаться воздухом, аурой будешь или что? Я проще скажу. Ну она про себя так думает. Ну вот это он имел в виду, да. Это, он понял тебя уже просто. Да, наоборот. Ну вот это он имел в виду. Да, ну это тебе и думал. Да. Ну наоборот, да. Это не важно, я уже просто ответил на все вопросы. Ну, не знаю, вдруг видишь, сколько всего. Видишь, как это сложно. А это вот просто, да, понимаешь. Но не слишком, да. Если будешь жить, чтобы есть, тогда будешь вот так вот делать, да.
Disorders that found that lectins can bind to a leptin receptor. Now, leptin, not to be confused with lectin, okay, leptin is the signal that the fat sends to the brain to let the brain know that we have plenty of fat on hand. Okay, so what ends up happening is in overweight individuals, we have so much fat that the fat is overrunning the brain with leptin signaling to the point where the leptin receptors become resistant. They no longer accept the response. They're getting so bombarded with a message from fat that they actually turn off the fat signaling altogether. So what can happen in the case of lectin? Since lectin from tomatoes and bell peppers
это тоже
and
парадокс, смотри,
can
ты
bind
же
to a
живешь
leptin
в своем
receptor.
организме. То есть, если, да, понимают, то есть, мировоззрение твое, то есть, ты думаешь, кто ты, ради чего, для чего живешь вообще, бла-бла-бла, неважно. То есть, ты управляешь своими мнениями, жизнью, ты стал уже просто, да. То есть, ты и есть организм, по сути. Если ты стрессуешь, то организм убивает себя, если, да. А почему, да, и так далее, да. И ты от этого никак не спасешься, как это да. Просто проще не стрессовать как-то. Да. Проще жить для чего, да, головой. Да, неважно. Долгий разговор. То есть это не надоели уже стрессовать. То есть ты и есть организм, короче. Вот и все. Это одно и то же. Человек и организм это одно и то же. Понимаете?
Receptor, it can trigger leptin resistance. So although this study was done in pigs, it's pretty interesting because it did find that insulin sensitivity improved when lectins were removed out of the diet. Now, I'm not saying that lectins are terrible, okay? Because there's other studies that demonstrate that as soon as you heat them, it breaks down the lectins. It's really the raw components, eggplant, again, bell pepper, things like that, that trigger the issues. Once you heat them, there's not as much of a problem.
Все вокруг болеют, а мы нет. Потому что у нас есть волшебная лампа. И она...
The other thing is that the British Journal of Nutrition had published a study that showed that in people, in human models, it's really only people that are highly sensitive with things like rheumatoid arthritis or lupus or anything like that, that would actually develop an issue from a nightshade. Understanding that we don't always know when we have those underlying issues. So sometimes removing nightshades like tomatoes and bell peppers, things like that, will illuminate how much better we feel. Personally, anecdotally, I don't do well with nightshades. I also have autoimmune conditions in my family. Now it's hard to address, but when I have raw tomato, I do feel really sick. I don't feel good. That's not to say that raw tomato is bad, right? The point is you should experiment with this. If you've reached a plateau, then maybe removing lectins might allow you to get through that plateau by relieving some of that leptin resistance that you're having as a result. Okay, now moving on. Phytic acid. Phytic acid is a group of 6 highly reactive phosphate molecules that are on specific nuts and vegetables. I talk about it with almonds and cashews and things like that. But when it comes down to veggies, raw spinach and raw chard are a no-go. Do not have a spinach salad. I know it looks pretty with its little, strawberries and, all this like pretty foo-foo stuff, but ditch it, cook it instead. Spinach isn't bad, it's bad raw. You see, what happens is it binds to minerals like iron, like zinc, and like magnesium, which are so unbelievably critical on keto, it's not even funny. And it's already hard to maintain our mineral balance when we're on keto, let alone having phytic acid coming in and stopping the actual absorption of those because it's chelating them. Okay, so point being, cook them. Cook the spinach in your eggs, cook it with some oil. Then when we get into the next one, which is called oxalates, which is another chelating compound, very similar to phytic acid, but a different pathway, we have things like spinach, chard, once again, rhubarb, okay? So those are things that you 100% should avoid having raw. Interesting study though, which is that cook the actual absorption of those because it's chelating them. Okay, so point being, cook them. Cook the spinach in your eggs, cook it with some oil. Then when we get into the next one, which is called oxalates, which is another chelating compound, very similar to phytic acid, but a different pathway, we have things like spinach, chard, once again, rhubarb, okay? So those are things that you 100% should avoid having raw. Interesting study though. The Journal of Agriculture and Food Chemistry found that when you steam things with oxalates in it, it reduces the oxalate count by 45%. But when you actually cook it, like sauteing it, it reduces the oxalate content by 85%. So do not steam your spinach or steam your chard. Actually cook it with a little bit of oil or cook it into something. Okay, put it in a saucepan with a little bit of coconut oil and cook it up that way versus steaming it. You're going to get rid of more of the oxalates. Now, what else is interesting is that a diverse microbiome affects this tremendously. So, okay, so point it instead, a no-go. Comes down to veggies, raw spinach and raw chard are a no-go. Do not have a spinach salad. I know it looks pretty with its little, strawberries and, all this like veggies. Raw spinach and raw chard are a no.
Шардоне. Еврей, что ли?
have a spinach salad. I know it looks pretty with its little, strawberries and, all this like pretty foo-foo stuff, but ditch it, cook it instead. Spinach isn't bad, it's bad raw. You see, what happens is it binds to minerals like iron, like zinc, and like magnesium, which are so unbelievably critical on keto, it's not even funny. And it's already hard to maintain our mineral balance when we're on keto, let alone having phytic acid coming in and stopping the actual absorption of those because it's chelating them. Okay, so point being, cook them. Cook the spinach in your eggs, cook it with some oil. Then when we get into the next one, which is called oxalates, which is another chelating compound, very similar to phytic acid, but a different pathway, we have things like spinach, chard, once again, rhubarb, okay? So those are things that you 100% should avoid having raw. Interesting study though. The Journal of Agriculture and Food Chemistry found that when you steam things with oxalates in it, it reduces the oxalate count by 45%. But when you actually
Хороший салат, значит, наверное, да.
cook it, like sauteing it, it reduces the oxalate content by 85%. So do not steam your spinach or steam your chard. Actually cook it with a little bit of oil or cook it into something. Okay, put it in a saucepan with a little bit of coconut oil and cook it up that way versus steaming it. You're going to get rid of more of the oxalates. Now, what else is interesting is that a diverse microbiome affects this tremendously. So there's a lot of people out there that will say, don't eat vegetables because our body can't break it down. But then the data shows that people that eat vegetables have a more diverse microbiome, and they tend to do better with those vegetables. So it's kind of like you are what you eat, which is very basic, right? If you limit your diet, then you are going to be someone that's going to be highly reactive to a vegetable. If you have a diverse amount of vegetables in your diet, your microbiome is more diverse and can handle them better. Your microbiome will break down phytic acid and oxalates. So if you eat a diverse amount of foods, yes, there is a small chance that in the beginning you have to adapt, but in the long run, you develop an ability to process that. And a quick note on tannins, one more thing. Tannins in things like teas and sometimes raspberries and sometimes vegetables. We don't really need to worry about it because they're in such small amounts that typically don't affect our bodies. And a lot of times tannins have a positive effect, like sort of eliminating amylase enzyme or inhibiting amylase enzymes. So we're actually absorbing less carbohydrates when we have tannins. Separate videos on that. I have a separate video on raspberries specifically talking about tannins. Anyhow, as always, keep it locked in here on my channel, and I will see you tomorrow. Let's talk about the 16 biggest keto mistakes that will block your progress. All right, number one, not reading labels. You end up eating a so-called keto-friendly something, and it's not actually keto-friendly. Now, as you start doing this, you're going to get better and better, and you're going to catch things, and you're going to learn certain things. But let's just start with the Atkins bars and shakes, okay? If you look at the ingredients, you'll find all sorts of things that are not just not keto-friendly, but they're not healthy at all. They have this protein blend with soy protein isolates, which is really hard in the liver, and it will increase your estrogen, and it's GMO. So there could be traces of glyphosate, which is an herbicide. Then they put whey protein in there, which is the highest on the insulin index, and then sodium caseinate, which is not the best normal source of protein. But the combination of those is very, very inexpensive protein. All right, and then we have this thing called polydextrose. What the heck is polydextrose? It's a synthetic fiber, right? And they'll say that, oh, it's a fiber, so it's not going to increase insulin.
And even the FDA approved it as being a dietary fiber, but the research is so new, and I know people who consume products like this, results are not near where they should be, and they have bloating, and they have digestive issues. And some of these new synthetic fibers, I just would recommend staying away from them. And then we have an ingredient, maltitol, which is the worst sugar alcohol. I mean, it's recommended for diabetics, but on the glycemic index, it's like a 52. And that's just like way too high. It's the absolute worst so-called diabetic-friendly sugar that you can consume, and I've done videos on that one sugar alcohol. And then they add vegetable oil, right? But what type of vegetable are they using? Soy oil, GMO, very cheap and very high in omega-6, which creates inflammation. There's artificial flavoring, and they also add maltodextrin. Now, on the glycemic index, maltodextrin is one of the sugars that is even higher than glucose. It is the worst sugar that you can consume. I don't know why they put it in their low-carb, keto-friendly bars. And of course, then you have Slim Fast, right? I mean, they play both sides. They sell to people who like sugar, and now they're getting into the keto market. So the first ingredient is milk protein concentrate, and of course, it's not organic or grass-fed cows, guaranteed. They use canola oil, which is GMO. They also use maltodextrin, artificial flavors. I mean, I think they used to have a different formula, but they've been bought out. They use whey protein isolate, which is very high on the insulin index, and they use this other fiber called isomalto oligosaccharides, IMO. And I used to recommend it for various syrups and different ingredients because it gives you that wonderful texture, but it's going to spike your blood sugars. So you do not want to consume anything with IMO. And then you have other brands like Hilo chips. They have potato starch. That's not keto friendly. So if you see potato starch, tapioca fiber, and soluble corn fiber, I would recommend not consuming it. I mean, even the soluble corn fiber, there's 10 different versions. Some have 40% sugar, some have 4% sugar, so you don't really know what you're getting. But even V8 now is putting the soluble corn fiber in their V8, so they can say it now comes with fiber. The fiber is not from vegetable, it's from this soluble corn fiber. Now, I just need to say this really quick. The study that they did with soluble corn fiber, and they said it will lower your blood sugars. Well, they're comparing it to glucose, so that's the control. So if you're comparing it to glucose, and it lowers your blood sugars more than glucose, then they can say it lowers your blood sugar. But they sometimes fail to mention that they're comparing it to glucose. So, number one, very important, read the ingredients always, especially in the beginning, so you get used to it. All right, number two, not looking at the serving sizes. There's a couple points about this. Number one, maybe you look at the carbs in salad dressing, and it says 2 grams of sugar, right? And that is per serving size, not per bottle, so it's like per teaspoon. So who would use 1 teaspoon of salad dressing on their salad? I might use 6 or 7 or even 8. So you have to multiply the serving size by the sugars or the carbs to get the actual value. The other little trick that they use is it's called a roundup trick. Let's say a carb has 0.8 carbs. It's less than 1, so they round it to 0. So if you increase the serving size, you could be getting a lot of carbs, but not knowing it because of this rounding little trick. Then they can say it lowers your blood sugar, but they sometimes fail to mention that they're comparing it to glucose. So, number one, very important, read the ingredients always, especially in the beginning, so you get used to it. All right, number two, not looking at the serving sizes. There's a couple points about this. Number one, maybe you look at the carbs in salad dressing, and it says 2 grams of sugar, right? And that is per serving size, not per bottle, so it's like per teaspoon. So who would use 1 teaspoon of salad dressing on their salad? I might use 6 or 7 or even 8. So you have to multiply the serving size by the sugars or the carbs to get the actual value. The other little trick that they use is it's called a roundup trick. Let's say a carb has 0.8 carbs. It's less than 1, so they round it to 0. So if you increase the serving size, you could be getting a lot of carbs, but not knowing it because of this rounding little trick that they use. All right, number 3, judging your success based on weight loss. Let's say you started the ketogenic plan and you didn't lose weight in the first week, and you go, wow, it didn't work, I'm going to quit. What you have to realize is that the first fat that's going to be burned is the fat inside your liver, okay? A really interesting study that shows that you can reduce 50% of your liver fat within the first 14 days. So your body is going to get rid of that before your belly fat. So you may not see much weight loss initially, especially since you have to get healthy to lose weight. The concept of get healthy, lose weight is very, very, very important. You don't lose weight and get healthy. You have to get healthy, then lose the weight. And you might want to let that sink in because it's a heavy concept. It is something that is very opposite of what people have been telling you. Your whole life they've been telling you to just lose weight so you can get healthy because obesity is a health risk. Well, actually it works a lot better if you just focus on your health because the weight will come off as a natural consequence of being healthy. And sometimes getting healthy takes a little bit longer, especially if you've been eating poorly your whole life. All right, number 4, comparing your results with others, like your spouse. Not a good idea. It's very discouraging, especially if you're a woman and you're comparing your weight loss to men because men don't have as much estrogen. And so women have estrogen, and estrogen makes fat, especially around the hips, the buttocks, the thighs. So you can't really do a good comparison. All right, number 5, not consuming enough salt. When you're on a ketogenic plan, you're going to lose more salt. And if you don't add more salt, I'm going to recommend sea salt, not table salt, you're going to feel weaker. You're going to feel the keto flu. So add more salt to prevent those 2 big symptoms. All right, number 6, the cheat day. I don't know whoever came up with the cheat day, but I'm not going to recommend a cheat day on this plan. I mean, would you recommend a cheat day when you're married? Let me find out. Hey, honey, Karen, I had a quick question.
Yeah.
What do you think about this concept of a cheat day for a marriage? All right, there's your answer. Cheat days don't work in a marriage, and they don't work in your diet. All right, number 7, you're doing too much or too little fat. Now, even though the ketogenic diet is about 75% fat, I found a couple interesting things about this that may help you. Initially, when you do the ketogenic plan, if you increase more fat so you can fast longer, that's going to help you. We're not trying to lose weight necessarily, we're just trying to fast longer, and that transition might only take like, I don't know, 2 or 3 days. When you start to get into ketosis and your appetite goes away, and you're fasting longer, and you're continuing to add all these additional fats like MCT oil, the keto snacks, the keto bombs are called, all the extra butter on top of the fat that comes with your protein, you may find that your weight loss is not as much as it should because if given the choice, the body will always burn the dietary fat before your own fat. So what you might want to do is not go low fat, but just not try to add all this fat to the meal and just eat the fat that normally comes with the protein, and it will help you lose weight a bit faster. But if your metabolism is fast, just keep adding more fat because it's working. Realize this, that if something is working, don't change it, okay? If something is not working, change it. All right, number 8, you're eating too much protein. Too much protein can increase insulin, and that can slow you down. Now, protein is the big variable, depending on your size, your metabolism, your age, if you're male, or female, if you're working out. But I wouldn't start doing high protein. I would definitely keep it moderate, and moderate.
On va développer tous les aspects de la fermentation. C'est bien fait. Pourquoi c'est une bonne idée de fermenter ces légumes?
So welcome everyone. I have a very special guest. Dr. Roger Schwelt is with us. And I don't know, you probably have seen his YouTube channel. He's all over the YouTube channel, especially with the COVID-19 and vitamin D. But Dr. Schwelt has some serious qualifications. Quadruple board certified in pulmonary medicine, internal medicine, critical care, sleep medicine. He's also the co-founder of MedCram, which teaches students and clinicians all over the world. And I think you have over 1 million students who actually have been through your course, which is quite impressive. So welcome, Doc.
Thank you very much, Dr. Berg. It's a privilege to be on.
Awesome. So, you know, I've been watching quite a few of your videos on vitamin D. You have quite a great information. I can see that you dove right into the research hardcore. So I want to kind of pick your brain and just share with our viewers. So I guess the first question I have is related to what has been the latest research in relationship to vitamin D and COVID-19 as far as prevention and treatment? I know in 2020 there's just a lot of observational studies, but I don't know if there's much clinical trials. There might have been a few. I don't know. You tell me. You've dove into this hardcore.
Yeah, so the clinical trials have been plagued, I think, with the issues of metabolism of vitamin D. So most of the clinical trials focused on, okay, here is somebody with COVID-19 showing up to a hospital. Let's give them a large doses of vitamin D. And hopefully, since we're seeing a huge association between low vitamin D levels in COVID-19, low vitamin D levels in poor outcomes, low vitamin D levels in mortality, maybe if we improve their vitamin D levels, they will have better outcomes. And the problem is that there's been a number of trials where they have supplemented in massive doses. There was one trial where they gave 200,000 international units to patients that came into the hospital. And really, they didn't see an improvement in mortality. They didn't see an improvement in time to a worsening. But on the other hand, there's been some trials where they actually have done this. So there was one called the SHADE trial, which was done in India. It was on about 30 or 40 patients, where they gave 60,000 international units. And they noticed that there was a reduction in the cytokine storm factors. There was a improvement in time to recovery. They turned negative on their SARS-CoV-2 tests faster. And so that was with regular supplementing of vitamin D. Now, for any serious student of vitamin D will know that when you take vitamin D into your body, either by supplementation or pill, or you get it from the sun, there's a process. There's actually a few steps in this process. The first one being where the liver puts on a very important hydroxyl group. For those of you who are chemistry deficient, that's an OH group on the compound. And that's important for the body to be able to use that. Well, that takes time, unfortunately. It takes a number of days, in fact. And so some researchers have said, well, maybe that's the problem. Maybe it's taking so long that it's not helping. And so there was a group in Spain that decided to take vitamin D already with a hydroxyl group on it called calcifediol, or 25-hydroxyvitamin D. And they did a study that showed a significant reduction in the number of people that had to be admitted to the intensive care unit. They followed up with a larger trial, which also showed some benefit, but there were some issues with the randomization. It was sort of a problem. And since that time, a lot of the studies that have come out have been on the regular vitamin D and not this 25-hydroxy. I should note to the people listening is that 25-hydroxyvitamin D is not available over the counter. It's only available as a prescription because it's used in patients with kidney problems and things of that nature. So that's kind of where we are right now with randomized